Why now? Why not, for example, 20 years ago?
This is a really good question. And I think people will often ask me, why aren't we doing this already? If it's such a good idea, we should be out there doing it. And I try to tell people that sometimes you are just one of the few who gets things started. When I tell people, they will still end up being one of maybe a few 100,000 people in the world who knows about this. So it's early days. And the reason for this is
Okay, so welcome to the Natural Hydrogen Investment Podcast, where we help you understand the rapidly evolving investment opportunity in natural hydrogen. I'm Anthony, chemical engineer and hydrogen enthusiast.
And I'm Morten Stahl, industry expert and founder of Natural Hydrogen Ventures.
In today's episode, we are going to talk about natural hydrogen investment, a new opportunity in resources and energy. But before we begin, don't forget that you can download our full 2025 Natural Hydrogen Investor Report on our website, NatH2Investing.com. That is NatH2Investing.com. Also, if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review so we can keep on going. So let's get things started. Morten, what is hydrogen in general? And what is the opportunity that people have in this space?
I think first a quick bit of context. Hydrogen is in a universal scale everywhere. It's the most abundant element, and most mass in the universe is hydrogen. The sun and stars, mostly hydrogen. But here on Earth, we meet hydrogen mostly combined with oxygen in water, or combined with carbon in what we call hydrocarbons, which is coal and gas and oil. This is where we have the hydrogen, and we have not been interested in hydrogen until we figured out that the energy we're using currently spews out a lot of carbon emissions into the atmosphere, and that has become a problem. So when the world started looking at zero carbon energy sources, hydrogen came up. We already knew how to produce hydrogen because hydrogen is needed in industrial ingredients like ammonia, where we have found different ways of splitting hydrogen from water or from natural gas to use this hydrogen. So we knew how to do this. And when you have hydrogen, if you forget for a minute how you got it, then hydrogen burns clean. When you're burning it, it doesn't emit any carbon emission. It just emits water vapor. And that's the opportunity. That's the promise. That's what you would like to use hydrogen in a low carbon, no carbon energy transition.
Right. So I've been following hydrogen for a few years now. I know there are green, blue, there's turquoise, which is an interesting one. There's pink from nuclear. But natural hydrogen, what is it? Why does it matter so much now in 2025?
I think crucially, natural hydrogen is something that has huge potential and that I personally like a lot. Not because it's hydrogen. I'm not liking it just because it's hydrogen. You might see someone who seems really in love with the molecule itself. But for me, it's all about cheap, available energy. Because if we want to have an energy transition, if we want something to be used more, it has to be cheap. Not because it's hydrogen, we shouldn't be a fan of energies or invest into something because it's hydrogen or not hydrogen. I think we'll need everything. But what we need is most of all cheap and widely available energy. And this is the true promise of natural hydrogen. Because opposed to the other existing types of the colors you mentioned earlier, natural hydrogen doesn't have an input cost. This is made by Mother Nature in the subsurface. So if you can find commercial quantities, you can just drill down using existing technology, and this will make it by far the cheapest type of hydrogen, the cleanest type of hydrogen, and even as cheap as fossil fuels. And this is what needed. This is what we need, both to decarbonize existing demand for hydrogen, which ammonia being the biggest part, but also to use it for other areas where electrification might be a problem.
Right. So now in the second part of the question, why now? Why not, for example, 20 years ago? Why are we just making it relevant these past 3 years, I would say, 2 or 3 years. Why?
Well, this is a really good question. And I think people will often ask me, why aren't we doing this already? If it's such a good idea, we should be out there doing it. And I try to tell people that sometimes you are just one of the few who gets things started. When I tell people, they will still end up being one of maybe a few 100,000 people in the world who knows about this. So it's early days. And the reason for this is that we weren't needing it. As I said earlier, we weren't needing hydrogen. This is a new thing. We were looking for hydrogen as an energy source only when we figured out that spewing out carbon emissions destroys our climate. So we need to look for something else. And then, as hydrogen is proven and known, it loves bonding. It's a lover. It bonds with everything it meets. So it ends up being water with oxygen, or it ends up being hydrocarbons with carbon. So it was thought not to exist free. And we kind of kept that idea as a society, even if when we drilled for oil and gas or water, we actually sometimes found it.
Right.
It was found in Denmark, where I'm based, when drilling for oil and gas in the 50s by accident. And these geologists, writing back and forth to each other to the lab, why is hydrogen here? We can't understand. But even if that should be really, really interesting, many scientists today would probably love looking into something like that. These geologists were looking for natural gas, so they just parked it, said, doesn't matter, we don't care, we're looking for something else.
Right. So, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that over the ages, then this happened more and more. And in the 80s, there was an accidental discovery in Mali that flowed almost pure hydrogen, which kind of sowed the seed of the natural hydrogen industry, because there was something you could look into. There is a system to be studied. And now, many years since, it has been studied. You have had a lot of work done by scientists all over the world, meaning that, especially within the last 3 years, we have gone from people thinking this doesn't exist till, yeah, it does actually exist. We know from US geology survey called USGS that there exist trillions of tons of hydrogen in the subsurface. The question for the industry right now is just, how can we find commercial quantities to extract? And
Right.
this is what more than 50 companies right now are doing. So there's been a massive increase in activity in the space, but starting from a really low point. That will be why many of you listening today maybe haven't heard about it before.
Right. And my question now is, I mean, maybe not for myself, but some viewers and listeners, they want to know, is this hydrogen, is it found in a free-flowing state, in a gaseous state? And more importantly, where does it come from? Because I mean, the theories or the concepts of generation of this hydrogen are very sometimes even controversial. So maybe there's something you can tell us about.
Of course. Basically, there's a different options for hydrogen to be created. If you really nerd it, there's a lot of different ways it can be produced. But mainly today, the industry is discussing iron-water reaction. Basically, water seeping down in the subsurface, reacting with iron-rich rocks that basically takes out the oxygen from the water and frees the hydrogen. You can also have radioactivity happening in the subsurface. Radioactive rocks splits water, again, freeing the hydrogen. And then you could also have hydrogen seeping from the mantle, deeper down in the earth, that might contain a lot of hydrogen, and that might be seeping. So this is the main three ways of how hydrogen is produced. And this is iron-water reaction and radioactivity. You can test that in lab. It does create hydrogen. So what right now, as I said, we're figuring out as an industry, where can this be found in commercial quantities? And this is what's really, brilliant, is that you can be using existing technologies. This will be, because it hopefully accumulates just like natural gas. It's a gas. It will be accumulating in the subsurface. And this requires some understanding of how does the subsurface work. And many, of course, have never thought about, how does natural gas, stay in the subsurface? But if you want to know, and I think many, maybe even natural gas investors doesn't know, but as this is a new industry, you got to be asking some good questions. So sadly, it isn't just, a buried cylinder with hydrogen. The gas is flowing into different rocks layers, and it's embedded in different materials that you can then drill down through and then have either pressure or pump it up through.
Right.
But basically, what's important to understand as investor is that this is existing technology. And so one of the brilliant things about natural hydrogen is that you'll be leveraging existing industry skills.
Right. That's something I actually wanted to ask you about. Many investors, or well, early investors and advisors, including yourself, I have heard before that you said it's very similar to the early days of oil and gas. And this to me it sounds very interesting. I also talked to a scientist out of Germany, and he said the same thing. It's very similar to the early days of natural gas, the 1800s even, and the late 1700s actually. So why do you think it's similar, and how do you think oil and gas savvy investor can get into this space? Like, what knowledge should somebody add to their existing knowledge, and what type of people are looking for this natural hydrogen? So if you are a geologist with petroleum experience, how could you make the shift? I know those are several questions. We can tackle them one by one.
Well, they kind of end up, fitting into each other. I think this is, you see some references sometimes to how the oil industry began. Something I weren't aware of when I started investing into this. I've been reading a lot of oil and gas history, but it basically started out with someone finding oil and gas or oil seeping in creeks and small rivers around the world, and you try to figure out how to get down to where this is coming from. So it's a lot of guesswork. And even after the first production of oil happened, the industry was still not using geologists for this. Imagine, they weren't looking, didn't have any subsurface experts. You could only do what you found on the surface. So when online articles reference this, compare it with the early oil and gas industry, it's very often compared with what needs to happen for the industry to take off. When there is a mate and discovery, it will move much faster. And this is expected to happen in natural hydrogen industry in the same way, but this time much, much quicker, because we do have people who know this stuff. We have mapped the subsurface, not always exactly in the areas we would like to, but we do have so much knowledge. So all the ingredients are in this industry to take off exponentially when it really gets going. And that's also the last part of your question, because skilled people, geologists, people who operate oil and gas companies can move into this industry and just get going. And this is something that I really like as an investor. I invest in private, very early companies. And what we're mainly discussing on this podcast is, of course, the publicly traded companies, to some degree a bit more mature. But when investing really early, I like that you actually work with people who've done it before. They know how to run a company. They know how to do stuff in the subsurface. We don't know exactly how to best look for natural hydrogen. This is what's being found out. This is the inherent risk in the early industry investment, but also what gives you the potential high reward when you find the companies who really knows how to do this. So there's a lot of brain power able to move into this industry. Millions of people, tens of thousands of companies who works the subsurface will be able to move in to do this, meaning that when it takes off, the natural hydrogen industry could really explode, which is always a bad word to use when we talk about hydrogen. So, forget that again. But really, truly exponential potential, no doubt.
Talking about explosions, I remember the origin story of natural hydrogen in Mali. Can you tell that story again? Because I think people will appreciate how it was discovered and why it came to be something in Mali.
Well, the story goes, like many places around the world, and of course in Mali, you'll need water. That's crucial. We can talk energy all we want, but water is the first step. And so there's been water wells drilled in the area, difficult to find. And one of these wells then found a gas. It's described as a wind flowing up through the well. And a poor guy, he accidentally turns on a cigarette in that wind, and that burns. So they find out there's something here, and it burns for a long time. They managed to close it down. Only years later, that is revisited. That, well, someone wants to find out, what is it? Is it, as would be widely expected, it's a gas that burns? It would be natural gas. But it turns out lab test shows that it's almost pure hydrogen. And this is one of these things where you can add this story to the fact that we know from the US Geology Service that there's so much hydrogen in the subsurface that if even what we believe to be recoverable, that is still twice as much energy that you have in known natural gas reserves. So adding this knowledge to the fact that by accident, by drilling, I think, 100-meter or less deep well for water in Mali, you find almost pure hydrogen. Imagine what could be done if we actually try to do this on purpose with all the industry skills we have. And this is finally what's happening now with a lot of companies, public and private, and a lot of scientists working on this.
Right. And when you say a lot of these companies and a lot of scientists, I'd love to know some names. I know, for example, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is owned by Bill Gates. So that's a good signal, right? That's a big name behind it. There's Amazon Climate Pledge. Who else is there? Because I know some Japanese companies have gotten involved as well. I would love to know more.
Well, I think I was just referring to some investors who made some really bold early stage investment in the big company in this space, which is called Coloma. It's a company we'll revisit later in a lot of podcasts, but they attracted a lot of early stage investment from known investors. And recently they raised even more money, which again, I would say it's a good sign. You start out raising, I think the first serious chunk of money they got was $90 million. They went out, did some work, drilled some wells, and then they raised $250 million. Among them, Japanese energy companies, industry companies. And these are sophisticated investors. They would not invest $250 million in something that just wasted $90 million. That's speculations, but seems reasonable. I think these guys have something, but they're working in stealth mode. They're a private company. We won't know. But lately, we've seen other bigger companies, maybe even more relevant to this specific industry, moving in, which is truly validating. We've had BP, the oil company, and Rio Tinto, the mining company, investing into another private company in UK called Snowfox. Again, we don't know much about this company. The reason why they're private is, among other things, that they want to keep their cards close. So what is really interesting is what kind of publicly traded companies are out there. And this is interesting for many reasons. It gives access to private investors, big and small, but also there's a lot of information the two of us can discuss on this podcast. And one to mention here is Hytera, the first pure play natural hydrogen company being listed. They recently got an investment from Fortescue Energy, or Fortescue Industries. Fortescue is an iron ore miner. And this is interesting. If you remember what I said earlier, Fortescue has for a long time pursued green hydrogen. They want to produce hydrogen to decarbonize their mining operations and to really move this industry forward. Really great. I like companies who have that vision. But it was always, screaming at me and the rest of the industry, you're an iron ore mining company, and natural hydrogen is found where you have iron ore. So you should at some time look into this. And eventually they did. They invested into the before mentioned company, Hytera, that now have enough money to start drilling in the US, where also Coloma is working.
One big thing I've been noticing about Australia, which Hytera, Gold Hydrogen are two of the companies in this country, is that there's been a slow shift. And I don't want to get ahead of myself. I myself have a background in green hydrogen. So there's been a slow shift of moving towards natural hydrogen in Australia. One of the things I noticed was that recently one massive project of green hydrogen in Australia, it collapsed. I mean, it didn't get the funding it needed, and they cancelled it. And I think this is very bullish for natural hydrogen. I'm not sure what your angle on this is, but I think it's a positive sign for natural hydrogen. I don't think they're going to abandon hydrogen entirely in the Australian government. Instead, they might be diversifying towards natural.
I think it comes back to my main thinking of natural hydrogen is that it's only worth something if it's cheap enough. And I would wish, if thinking purely of what will be best for natural hydrogen industry would be that people invested a lot of money in green and blue hydrogen, and they built a lot of pipeline infrastructure so that it was ready when natural hydrogen starts flowing all over the world. But for obvious reasons, that seems not to be the case, because at some point before reaching the final investment decision, companies planning green hydrogen projects have a problem that the product they're producing will be too expensive. There's no one willing to offtake it. And we see this quite a lot recently, and I think you could get the impression that the hydrogen industry is having a downturn right now. But that's important to distinguish between the types of hydrogen. This is too expensive hydrogen. Yeah, it's not a good business, obviously. But if it's cheap enough, it will be totally different. And this is what natural hydrogen has the promise to be.
Yeah. And another thing I noticed is that when it comes to the price, you have to take into account different things. Like, for example, when it comes to green hydrogen, it's mostly the production, the manufacturing equipment, and the operation, the hub, and so on. When it comes to natural hydrogen, it's more of the exploration of getting it right, because you need to go out and drill. Well, you need to go out and find these places to use your seismic or whatever type of technology you're going to be using to detect it, and then you have to drill. So the capex, the opex, it's very different, right? And the amount of people you need is also changes. You need different types of specialists. What makes, for example, a good team in natural hydrogen, a good company? What to you as an investor tells you this company is worth following and they're using the money in the right way, they're drilling in the right places, and so on?
Well, I think we should definitely deep dive into the specific companies in one of our next podcasts. But just quickly, it's always difficult, as an investor. What are you looking for? And I think especially when investing into publicly traded companies, you might not have the same time as we do as private investors to get the team right. But of course, team always means something. But is it an experienced team? Is it oil and gas experience? I value that a lot. But I think also crucially, if you're looking at the companies out there, it matters where they're working, because as you said, it comes with different kind of costs, and no matter the type of hydrogen, you got to move it to somewhere where it can be used. So working in areas that is kind of close to where it might be needed, it might be difficult to know exactly if you're a private investor, but you can fairly deduct that many places in the US is closer to market access than some places in Western Australia or Greenland would be. And that's not to say that Greenland and Western Australia, maybe probably a better option with Western Australia than Greenland, won't be a really good investment. It probably just requires that they need to find bigger quantities to make it worthwhile to move it out of there. But generally approach I would recommend anyone looking into investing is spreading out. This is an industry where it will be impossible likely to pick the exact winner. And this is why our investment company, we invest in many different companies. So spreading out is always a good choice. And you have the opportunity now because there's more than 30 companies that work natural hydrogen that are now publicly traded.
That's great. Actually, we're going to talk about that in the next episode, which is pretty interesting. And actually, before we go, I wanted to ask you, because you just said something very relevant when it comes to spreading out, diversifying. Where is natural hydrogen being explored? Because we need to know this right now. I mean, it's to me, it's probably the most exciting part. It's not just one or two continents.
Yeah. Well, people often ask me, where is it? Is it only some specific area? But you need to remember that it's likely similar to oil and gas, which you can find everywhere. Maybe not in your backyard, but somewhere close. But there's other reasons, except the geology, that means where are things happening, and you got to be able to actually go out and get a license to explore and later extract the hydrogen. And because the world thought it didn't exist, in many countries, it isn't mentioned in the resource laws. So, for these reasons, while the rest of the world catches up, there's a lot of activity in the US. US is something that we will probably talk in depth about in another podcast. Has so many reasons why it's likely here you'll see the industry take off. Combined with Australia was the first, Southern Australia was the first state to allow for a natural hydrogen license. The rest of the world works a bit different than the US, where you can just ask the landowner. But Australia and other places need to change some regulations. But Australia have done this. France have done it as well. There's quite a lot of activity in France, but with, sorry to say, classical European speed. It takes a bit longer. You can get a license in France, but apparently it takes 18 months to get it. So, yeah, if you're a bit on the impatient side, I think maybe US and Australia will see some results from quicker, good or bad.
Right. So when it comes to, we can say like US and Australia are tier 1 and everything else is tier 2, tier 3 and so on.
I would always be a bit afraid of, being so outspoken specifically on this, but I would say, I think I would rank, you'll have to rank US as the tier 1 option in speed. Maybe you will find better geology and better teams working somewhere else, but the sheer reason that you can go out, get a license, and get going in the US in such a short time span, and also, crucially, it's by far the cheapest place to drill.
That's good. That's interesting.
So as
right.
an investor, if you are crunching numbers on how long runway does a company have, it is likely there's always thing who can mix this up, if you get a grant from the government somewhere. But in the US, all else being equal, it's cheaper to drill because you have so many oil and gas and natural gas wells, especially running around. You have a lot of experienced people doing this.
Right. Perfect. Thank you. So before we go, I have one last question, Morten. Where do you think natural hydrogen will be in the next 5 to 10 years? And what needs to happen right now for that to become true?
I think it depends very much when we'll get the trigger, the one that starts the exponential growth or the explosion, if you like. And that will have to be a commercial discovery, somewhere where they actually find enough hydrogen in the same place that you can extract it, have something that, you can make a good business case out of. I personally think that while it might not be the biggest discovery, this kind of discovery will happen in the US. This is where we've seen most activities. Maybe it has happened already with some of the private companies doing this, but there will be no rush to telling the world because they will want to take more of the good acreage, the good land they found for this. We don't know. This will be speculations. But when some of the public traded companies are drilling, they will have to tell the market because it's price sensitive. And then we will know. And that could trigger. If that happens soon, we'll be having a lot of activity, hopefully a lot of production in 5 years. From an investment point of view, you could have an amazing return on investment as soon as the industry is proven. You don't have to be, the industry doesn't have yet to have saved the world with, clean energy. But as soon as you have something that flows commercially, you would see the start of this industry taking off, which feeds back into, why should investors be interested in this? Because this is one of only few times in your life, likely, that you will be able to follow an industry before it takes off. This is the first real new energy source in many, many years, because it is not just an energy carrier, but a true new energy. And right now, the market is not appreciating the full potential, would be my view as an investor. But as soon as it's proven, you will start to see a difference in value put on things and money invested into the space. So
Fantastic.
This is what we are going to track. As you know, of course, what we want to do with this podcast and our NatH2Investing, we want to track this industry with a special focus on the publicly traded companies because there's a news flow we can discuss and there's access for investors, big and small, to get exposure to this potentially game-changing industry.
Right. Well, it's been great talking with you. I mean, this is so interesting. And the idea of this trigger you mentioned, it is necessary, right? It is necessary for every industry. I think with the AI, for example, we can talk about OpenAI and ChatGPT. That was the moment when things really started picking up. So natural hydrogen, to me, it's the same situation, just like you say. And being around to see it grow, I mean, I've been in this space now for over a year, and I think that it's been very exciting to me, or for me, to see how these companies have just began growing in number and growing and expanding their geographical distribution. So let's just wait and see what happens. So that's all for today's episode. I'm really happy you stuck around and watched all of it. If you're watching on Apple or Spotify, please go ahead and subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. We really appreciate it. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. Same thing. We really appreciate it too. Don't forget, you can find 2025 investor report on our website, nath2investing.com. That's nath2investing.com. And it has tons of insights that you'll love. Finally, don't forget to stick around as we're going to be releasing this bi-weekly, this podcast, and we're going to be releasing regular news on nath2investing.com. So check out our social media, our YouTube, our LinkedIn company page, and our x.com profile, because we have tons of insights there. You can check out the report that we have on our website, like I mentioned, nath2investing.com. That is nath2investing.com. We will have insights for a long time. So subscribe and stay updated. That's all, and thank you for watching today's episode. See you, Morten.